Okay, let's unpack something that, well, might sound a bit familiar. Back in 2011, over half of Americans thought a small secret group was really calling the shots.
Hmm.
And get this, a quarter believed the whole financial crisis was, deliberately cooked up.
Right, like a conspiracy. You hear similar things maybe about George Soros or the Illuminati legends.
Exactly. And these ideas, however strange they might seem, they actually point to something fundamental, don't they?
They really do. It highlights this tension, this question of how we understand the world. Is it through hierarchies, clear lines of command, top-down structures?
Or is it through these more fluid, interconnected webs,
Yeah.
networks, basically?
Precisely. And conspiracy theories often, well, they jump straight to these big, complex network explanations, usually involving some kind of hidden bad intention.
Yeah, they do. And that's really what we want to get into today. We've been looking at some fascinating material on this dance between networks and hierarchies through history. Our goal here is to explore that dynamic, try to find a middle ground. We want to grasp the real power of networks without, going full conspiracy theorist.
It's about seeing both sides, how networks function, but also how hierarchies shape things.
Exactly. So for you listening, if you want to get a solid handle on a complex topic pretty quickly, this should give you a really useful framework, a way to see how power and influence actually work without getting bogged down.
Cutting through the noise, focusing on these two core ways things get organized.
So let's start with the basics then. When we say networks and hierarchies, what are we actually talking about?
Okay, so network theory, at its core, it's about nodes and edges. Nodes are just the individual points, people, computers, organizations, whatever.
The dots on the map.
Exactly. And the edges are the lines connecting them, the relationships, the links, the flow of information. Think of your friends on social media. You're all nodes. The friendships are the edges.
Makes sense.
Now, to understand these networks, we look at things like centrality. Degree centrality is simple. How many connections does a node have? Like the most popular person.
Okay.
Between Hollowness centrality is about which nodes act as bridges on the shortest paths between others. Key connectors.
The gatekeepers are hubs.
Sort of, yeah. And closeness centrality measures how easily a node can reach everyone else, like an information hub. Nodes with lots of connections or crucial bridging roles, we often call them hubs.
Okay, so networks are about connections, pathways, hubs. How does a hierarchy relate to that? It feels so structured,
Yeah.
so different.
Well, here's the interesting thing. A hierarchy is actually a special kind of network.
Huh?
Yeah, picture an upside-down tree. One node at the top, layers below it. The key thing is how the connections work. In a pure hierarchy, information and commands flow downwards.
Top down.
Right. Very few, if any, connections side to side between nodes on the same level. And crucially, no cycles things don't loop back up easily. It's designed to maximize the top node's control.
So it is a network, just a very specific, controlled pattern of connections.
Exactly. The pattern is regular, predictable, focused on vertical control, unlike the often messier, multi-directional connections in other networks.
Okay, that distinction is clear. Networks connecting all over, hierarchies focusing vertically. So where have we seen these two really clash or interact in big ways throughout history?
Oh, a great early example is the Age of Discovery. Think about the Portuguese explorers. They built this incredible network.
How so?
Well, they had technological innovation, the caravel ship, much more agile and huge advances in cartography, mapping. This network of ships, sailors, maps, and knowledge let them push outwards.
Right.
But then they reached South China, and they bumped right into the Ming Dynasty's hierarchy. A very rigid top-down system.
With the emperor at the absolute peak.
Absolutely. The emperor saw China as the center of the world. Outsiders were tributaries. These Portuguese traders, arriving through their network, were seen with huge suspicion, filthy hearts, the records say. Trade was heavily restricted.
So the advanced network met this wall of hierarchical control.
Precisely. It shows how a powerful network can still be checked or resisted by an entrenched hierarchy operating on totally different principles. A clash of organizational logic.
That's fascinating. What about something like the Reformation? That feels like a huge network-driven shift.
Definitely. The Reformation is, maybe, the classic case of a network challenging a major hierarchy, the Roman Catholic Church.
And the catalyst was technology.
You got it. Gutenberg's printing press. Suddenly, information, Luther's ideas, his critiques, could spread like wildfire.
Faster than the church could control it.
Way faster. The church had this very hierarchical control over doctrine, scripture, everything. The printing press enabled a decentralized network. Ideas spread from intellectuals to cities, even read aloud to peasants from pamphlets. It bypassed the hierarchy.
And the result?
Well, massive upheaval. Religious revolt, the fragmentation of religious authority in Europe, leading eventually to that principle of cuius regio, is religio, the ruler decides the religion.
Wow. So the network, powered by printing, fundamentally disrupted the old order.
It really did. Shows the power of a new communication technology to just rewire things and undermine that central control.
And this wasn't just about religion, right? Didn't the Enlightenment see similar network effects with ideas?
Yes, building on that foundation. During the Enlightenment, you see these influential intellectual networks emerge. Think of Voltaire and his massive correspondence network.
Just letters flying back and forth?
Thousands of them. Creating this web of shared ideas, totally decentralized. And then you had the salons, especially in Paris.
Run by women, the salonier.
Exactly. They created these physical hubs for discussion, bringing different people together outside the formal structures. Even in Scotland, you had informal clubs driving the Scottish Enlightenment.
Like the Philosophical Society.
Right. These were spaces where ideas could flow more laterally, challenging the established hierarchies of the crown and the church. It shows how these informal networks can foster innovation.
So networks were really driving change. But history doesn't move in just one direction, does it? Hierarchies push back.
Oh, absolutely. The pendulum swings. After the massive disruption of Napoleon, who, you could argue, leveraged network-like speed and flexibility in his campaigns, the powers of Europe reacted.
The Congress of Vienna.
Exactly. That was all about restoring order. They set up a new hierarchy, the pentarchy. Austria, Britain, France, Prussia, Russia, the Big Five.
Trying to create a stable, top-down system for international relations.
Pretty much. Limiting the influence of smaller states, preventing another Napoleon. A deliberate move to reimpose hierarchy after a period of network-driven chaos.
And within this more hierarchical 19th century, what about figures like the Rothschilds? They were a huge financial network.
Oh, the Rothschilds are a fantastic case study of a network operating within that hierarchical world.
How did they manage that?
Their private information network was just leagues ahead of the official state systems. They had their own couriers, their own intelligence gathering.
Famously getting the news of Waterloo incredibly fast.
Exactly. Faster and more securely than governments. This information advantage made them indispensable to the ruling elites, financing governments, shaping markets. Their network didn't overthrow the hierarchies. It served them, profited from them, operated alongside them.
So networks aren't always against hierarchies. They can be tools within them.
Precisely. It shows that complex relationship. Networks can reinforce hierarchies sometimes.
Okay, this back and forth is key. Then we get to the 20th century. That seems like, well, the ultimate era of hierarchy in many ways, but also the beginning of today's networks.
You're right. The mid-20th century saw the peak of centralized hierarchical states. Think Stalin's Soviet Union, Hitler's Germany, Mao's China, maximum top-down control after the old empires collapsed.
Almost total hierarchy.
Almost. But even then, things were shifting beneath the surface. The later 20th century saw some of these rigid structures start to crack, most dramatically with the fall of the Soviet Union.
And the internet emerges around this time.
Significantly, yes. And it's crucial to see the internet not really as the cause of hierarchical breakdown, but maybe more as a consequence or accelerator of it. Its development, particularly the core TCP/IP protocols, was decentralized, non-hierarchical by design.
No central control point.
Right, reflecting that broader shift away from rigid centralization. It shows that even in peak hierarchy, the potential for networks persists and can eventually reemerge.
Which absolutely brings us to today, our so-called networked age. It feels like networks are constantly bumping up against hierarchies now.
The challenges are everywhere, aren't they? Take 9/11. That was an attack by a network Al-Qaeda, relatively decentralized, targeting the hubs of American power.
Financial and transport hubs. Symbols of the hierarchy.
Exactly. And the response, understandably, was largely hierarchical, a state mobilizing its military, its intelligence agencies. But countering a diffuse network with a traditional hierarchy proved, well, difficult. Asymmetric warfare.
And then the 2008 financial crisis. Different kind of network problem.
Very different trigger, but similar underlying issue. It wasn't an attack, but the failure of one node Lehman Brothers cascaded through the incredibly interconnected global financial network.
Showing how vulnerable those networks can be.
And how quickly problems can spread systemically. Again, traditional hierarchical regulations struggled to keep up with the complexity and speed of the networked financial system. These crises highlight network vulnerabilities and the challenges they pose to established structures.
Okay, and what about the tech giants?
No.
Google, Facebook, Meta, they seem like networks, but they're also massive corporations.
That's the paradox, isn't it? They provide platforms for vast, seemingly decentralized social networks connecting billions.
But
But the ownership, the control over the algorithms, the data, the profits, that's highly concentrated. It's a new kind of power structure, a network that generates immense value, but where control rests in a very small hierarchical core. They coexist with state hierarchies, but also wield enormous influence themselves.
a new form of network hierarchy, hybrid almost.
You could say that. It shows that networked doesn't automatically mean decentralized power.
We've also seen populism rise, often using social media networks. But sometimes the support seems strongest, where internet use is maybe lower. How does that work?
That's a great point. It shows we can't just look at online networks. Populist movements are often very effective at using social media to get messages out, sure. But they also rely heavily on offline networks. Community ties, local groups, word of mouth, existing social fabrics where those online messages resonate and get reinforced. It's the interplay between online and offline that's often key.
Right, the message needs fertile ground, offline connections to really take root,
Exactly. It's rarely just about the digital side.
and looking globally. Cyber warfare, that seems like a massive challenge to the old way of states dealing with security.
Huge challenge because it messes with the traditional hierarchical model of state security. It's hard to attribute attacks definitively who actually did it.
Plausible deniability.
Right. And there's this constant offense-defense race. It forces states, which are fundamentally hierarchical, to adapt rapidly to threats emerging from complex, often non-state networks. Different countries are trying different approaches.
Even something like the recent pandemic response showed this tension, didn't it?
Absolutely, a global stress test. You saw varying success with top-down government mandates versus more decentralized information sharing or community responses. Both hierarchies and networks were tested, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, often interacting in complex ways.
So it really feels like this tension, this dynamic interplay, is the constant theme.
That's the core message, I think. For you listening, the key takeaway is that seeing the world through this lens, the interaction between networks and hierarchies, is incredibly powerful.
It helps you analyze history, current events.
Right. It moves beyond simplistic explanations. Neither structure is always dominant. It's how they push and pull against each other, how they adapt, that shapes so much of what happens.
Okay, so a final thought then, something for you to chew on after this deep dive. With everything becoming so digitally connected, are we really seeing the lines blur? Is it becoming one big, messy network? Or are we just seeing new kinds of digital hierarchies emerge within these networks?
That's the big question, isn't it? Like those tech giants we talked about.
Exactly. What does all this mean for us, for individuals, our ability to act, to have influence? And what does it mean for power in society generally? Are we gaining agency in networks or losing it to new forms of control?
Something to keep observing, definitely. How do these patterns play out in your own life, in the news, in the organizations you're part of?
Yeah. Keep an eye out for those networks and hierarchies. They're everywhere.